Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cannons and Cocktails Live. I'm Scott Ramsey, and I'm the owner and executive producer and your host from Fort Beacon Studios here in Beacon, New York. And it is such a privilege to introduce this gentleman. He is an Army officer enlisted in active duty since 1995. He's an enlisted paratrooper, an armor officer, a military advisor, and a professor of history at the United States Military Academy at West Point. Ladies and gentlemen, an amazing guy, my dear friend, Colonel Sean Sculley.
Thank you. Thank you.
What an incredible treat to be wrapping up our July 4th weekend here on this 250th birthday of this amazing country. I want to talk about the fact that we are here because of Dennings Point Distillery and the amazing work that they do to foster community events. Thank you, Susan and team. We have an amazing cocktail bar set up in the back, run by who I believe to be the most handsome bartender in Beacon, Brian Donnelly. And we are also so incredibly grateful today because, you know, part of what excites Susan and subsequently excites all of us is local history, right? And so that's really how this brainchild started. We were sitting around in the fall of 2024 and literally kind of came up with this idea, and Susan was all for it. And then we launched our first Cannons and Cocktails in February of 2025. And since then, I think we have done 4 episodes, I'm not sure.
I think it's 4.
We've done 4 episodes. And it really is all about local history and how important that is to us. And it's all been about celebrating the Revolutionary War. And so when you think about local history, I mean, here we sit in this very space. We're across the street from Madame Brett's house. We are here at the Veterans Memorial Building, which was dedicated in 1924. This space is over 100 years old, all built in honor of honoring veterans of our armed forces. And so I just want to give a big, giant shout out to John McEnroe and the team here at the Veterans Memorial Building for being so welcoming. Because I promise you, you do not want to be over at the distillery at this moment having this conversation because it is close to 100 degrees outside, but we're going to kick back over there in the fall. But before we get started, the fact that we are here in this space and this is about the Revolutionary War, if you have served in the United States military, would you just please take a moment to stand so we can recognize you? Thank you. Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate that. All right, so this particular conversation is all about the Declaration of Independence, right? It's July 4th. We've been celebrating for the last, few days this amazing document that is such an incredible foundation of our country. And so we really wanted to focus today specifically on the Declaration. And when we do that, I want to go back, Sean, and start talking about there's some incredible context that really sets up the possibility of why the Declaration can even really exist or come to pass. So tell us about that context.
So are we talking about the scientific revolution, or
like farther back even? We were talking about the Enlightenment and that work.
The Declaration of Independence in many ways is the distillation of a revolution in ideas that had been going on for 300 years before that document was written.
Yeah.
So prior to the scientific revolution, everybody thought of Europeans in particular, thought of the universe as this closed, finite system. Imagine the inside of a ball, the inside of that disco ball up there on the ceiling, if you will. And in the center of that is another ball, and that's the Earth. And the Earth stands still, and everything revolves around it. Well, by the 1450s, 1460s, lens technology and mathematical advancements began to prove that that wasn't possible. You couldn't predict planetary movements. You couldn't predict the stars where they were going to be with that model. And so first Copernicus made up a theory that the sun was the center of the universe and everything revolved around the sun. And then Galileo started looking at Jupiter and decided that doesn't work either. The math doesn't work. And he comes up with a new model of the universe that it's infinite. Now, where's the center of infinity? It doesn't exist. What's outside of infinity? There is no outside. The implications of an infinite universe changes everything. It changes God, where God exists, where is heaven. If you change God, you change the source of power. Where does power come from? In a finite universe, God is outside of it, and he is pointing down and picking people to anoint with power, i.e. divine right to rule. And therefore, the people who are then governed are subject to that power. And that's why they're called subjects. But in an infinite universe, that doesn't work. So where is God? Where is heaven? Where does power derive from on earth? That all begins to change. This is why Galileo is imprisoned in his house for the rest of his life, because religious leaders understand the implications of what this is going to entail moving forward. That revolution then leads to a whole nother revolution, which is a religious one that we think of as the Protestant Reformation. The idea that individuals can take control of their own religious education, that they have power, that comes from God in each of the individuals, then leads to this religious war that we know as of the 30 Years' War.
Right. I mean, this is something I had never thought about, but you have to go that far back to recognize the fact that the Declaration, this language can't exist with people believing that other people have control, but this idea that God is actually individually connected and that there is that power that sits in that space.
That's right. I mean, the idea is really that power, our conceptions of power, are all myths. What matters is that as a group, we believe it. When we start to disagree, revolution occurs. And what happened in Europe was a disagreement over the source of power. Was it anointed on individuals, or did it come from all of us from the bottom up? And as that disagreement grew, we had religious wars, we had political civil wars, and pertinent to our story, we had the English Civil War of 1742 to 1749. So Henry VIII, some of us may have heard of Henry VIII. He's the one with all the wives. He beheads some of them. He divorces others. And there's a great Broadway show about that, by the way.
It all comes back to Broadway.
I love it. Fantastic music. He starts a revolution in terms of religion in England because he wants to take power. So he creates the Church of England. He splits from the Catholic Church. But the implications of that is that Protestantism and more radical Protestant ideas about individual power take root in England to the point where in 1642, men known as the Roundheads or Puritans who want to purify the Church of England take command of Parliament and decide that they have more of a right to rule than the king, and they fight the Civil War over it. And when that war ends in 1649, the king is beheaded, Parliament is in charge, and for a while, a new settlement arises. They do restore the king in 1660, but by 1688, in what's known as the Glorious Revolution, they come up with this resolution known as the King in Parliament. The idea is that Parliament gets to decide who is king. Now consider that. Not God. Not a divine right to rule. The representatives of the people in Parliament decide who the king is going to be.
Yeah, very, very important, which is not something I'd ever considered before. So, if you want to go back and watch previous episodes where you can literally track us through the evolutionary time of the Revolutionary War, they are on the Fort Beacon channel over on the YouTube. But remind us just how long the actual Revolutionary War was.
Okay, so the actual American Revolution is 8 years.
8 years.
From 1775 to 1783, and you've asked a historian to do math in public. It's not I have to start counting fingers.
That is quite all right. That's all quite. But the point is to say that even though we're celebrating this moment now, there is still much more to go as far as the war is concerned. But talk to me about Thomas Paine and common sense and this idea of power and common sense and where that plays in.
Absolutely. So in order to do that, let's talk a little bit about the Enlightenment and what happens with the Enlightenment, because the next revolution that occurs is a revolution in ideas. So So we have a revolution in science, and then we have a revolution in religion, and then we have a revolution in ideas. And Thomas Paine is going to draw directly from that. So the experience of the English Civil War is awful. It's brutal. And some thinkers of the Enlightenment, some philosophers, have been scarred by that conflict. And the two most famous are Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. Now, Hobbes believes that men are brutes. He believes that they need a strong centralized government in order to control their baser nature in order to provide stability. Locke believes men are basically good and social creatures who, if left to their own devices, will form limited governments in order to protect their liberties so they can thrive. Now, both philosophers have bought into the new myth of power, that it comes from the people, right? They don't disagree on the premise, they disagree from there. Thomas Paine is a fan of John Locke, as are most of the American colonists at this time who are thinking about these things deeply. Thomas Paine's gift, though, is that he can take very complicated ideas like the social contract or limited government, these hard to grasp ideas, and he could put them forward in plain English with wit and make it look like it's just common sense. Right? So he makes the argument that it is nonsensical that one man should rule a whole group of people that are separated from him by an ocean and 3,000 miles, and that it would only be the sense of common people that they should rule themselves. But he turns the phrase as well to say that he would like that sense to become common to all. So common sense has this double meaning.
Yeah, and this sets us up for the language of the Declaration, which we'll get to.
Absolutely.
Should you be interested, Sean and I have had endless hours of conversations over the Hobbes versus Locke approach. I tend to fall on the humans are selfish side of the Hobbes conversation, and Sean tends to land on the humans are good side of the conversation. So that's just some interesting context. So the other question, though, that I think is so interesting, which we've covered previously, is this fact that, even though the Revolutionary War is happening and it's moving in motion and the Declaration's coming into play, there are still a lot of people here in the colonies that are still very much loyalists to Great Britain. And I'm curious about the fact that there is this collective sense of the individual power piece, and yet there's still folks who are happy to be loyal to Great Britain.
Absolutely.
And how does that happen?
By the 18th century, this idea of individual power and the people having power is the predominant thought. In the American colonies, I would say you have three groups. You have loyalists who absolutely believe that the American colonies should remain colonies and a part of the British Empire. And the reason that they believe that is because it provides economic stability, it provides political stability, and they believe that the king and parliament is the best political solution to Locke's argument about limited government that they're ever going to get. Then you have the patriots on the far other side, think of them as the radicals, who believe that the king and parliament is actually a government system that is going to eventually lead to tyranny, that the king and his ministers will use the armies and the navies in order to subjugate the American colonists and not protect their rights. Therefore, they need to split. But there is a whole group of people in the middle who simply believe that the British government has gone too far, does not understand what it is doing. They should remain in the empire. They just need the empire to fix some of its political mistakes. And there is a spectrum here between them. So it's not just you're either patriot or you're loyalist. There's a whole group of people in the middle.
Yeah.
Sound familiar?
Sounds familiar.
There are a whole bunch of people in the middle who believe that the system is basically good, but that there need to be some fixes.
Yeah, okay. So we have common sense. We have this sort of becoming part of the pop culture and understanding of this idea of common sense and this individual power piece. Let's move into the actual semantics of the Declaration. Like, people are coming to, the Revolutionary War is being fought. Who are the individuals who are at play here, and how are they starting to coalesce into this space?
There are a lot of individuals at play.
Yeah.
There is the famous Committee of Five, That would be Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. Those two people often forget. They don't play as large of a role, and you'll hear that Robert Livingston even refuses to sign the Declaration of Independence later. Then there are other politicians, John Hancock, who is the president of the Congress, and Morris, Robert Morris, Gouverneur Morris, there are many others. But that committee of 5 is going to be the committee that is in charge of drafting a Declaration of Independence. Okay. But prior to that, you had John Adams stand up on May 15th of 1776 and make a declaration that the Congress should declare independence because the king is now deploying German mercenaries against American colonists, and that they have attempted redress and nobody is listening to them in Great Britain. At the same time, the Virginia Convention, which is their new government, has directed their delegates to pass a resolution or put forward a resolution in Congress that would declare independence if passed. It would have to be passed by all 13 colonies for that to take effect. Now, Richard Henry Lee is told to do that from Virginia, and he does so on June 7th. And for 3 days, Congress debates back and forth whether or not they can pass this resolution. The problem is New York doesn't know what it wants to do. Pennsylvania is actually against it, though the delegates are for it from Pennsylvania. But their assembly, their colonial assembly, is against it. And they believe that they cannot get a consensus to vote for this. And so they table the resolution for 3 weeks. And they send the delegates back home to make sure that their colonial assemblies will support the resolution for independence. And they establish the Committee of 5 to draft the Declaration. Congress knows that they are actually on the winning side of this from a popular perspective. Common Sense had sold over 100,000 copies in 3 months to a population of 2 million. I would love to have those book sales.
Right, yeah, and I'm so fascinated by that. You think about, we're talking about 1776. How are 100,000 copies being printed, being distributed, getting into the hands of people? I mean, that's crazy to think of that.
Well, one of the things that the British had to contend with was the fact that in North America, you had more printing presses per capita than anywhere else in the world. Mm-hmm. Additionally, you had a far higher percentage of literacy rates, particularly in New England and the middle colonies, than you had anywhere else in the world. So everybody's reading. Newspapers are mostly thriving. Mm-hmm. Thomas Paine had been working for one, the Philadelphia magazine that he was working for.
Yeah.
And so the ability to transmit these ideas is actually not that difficult. And if 100,000 copies were sold, many, many more people had actually read it.
Exactly. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is that, in the Schoolhouse Rock version, the Declaration just sort of kind of happens and shows up, right? Like there's just this singular thing. But the reality is, and it's very cute, and it's a little cartoon. Yeah. But the reality is, for months, if not, I guess months is probably fair, there were all these little individual, I say little, that's unfair, but these resolutions going on across all of these individual states of declaring.
There's 90 petitions that are sent to Congress from different colonies, all demanding that Congress consider independence between April and July of 1776. Yeah. The timing of this with the publication of Common Sense in January and its sales through April, it's too much to be a coincidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just, to me, context is everything. And so, again, sort of we're layering all these contextual pieces together. So here we are, these 5 folks come together. Let's talk about those 5 individuals, who I also know about because everything I know about history I learned from a Broadway show in 1776. Taught me that, so.
I love that film. It's fantastic. I do think John Adams gets the short end of the stick on it, if I remember correctly. But that committee of 5, the big names are Ben Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson. Now, Ben Franklin obviously is an important person already for all of the things that he had done in terms of science and philosophy. He had been a diplomat to Great Britain. He had, in fact, just returned not too soon before. So he's well known. John Adams is on that committee because he has been an ardent supporter of independence for a very long time. When the Olive Branch petition was sent to England a year prior, in July of 1775, telling the king, hey, fix these things, but we want to reconcile with you. And this is after the Battle of Bunker Hill. John Adams refuses to have anything to do with it. He leads the minority against sending that petition. So he is a known quantity. But Thomas Jefferson, the youngest member of the committee, 33 years old at this point in time, had already published two very important political treatises, one arguing why it would be that Virginia should revolt, and the other one why America should revolt, both written in 1774 and 1775. He was known to be the most eloquent writer. John Adams was known not to be the most eloquent writer. And he knew it. He knew he wasn't very good at it. Have you ever read, I don't know, the bylaws for your condominium? I have, by the way. It's a very specific example. Try reading it and not falling asleep or understanding what the heck they're talking about. That's John Adams' legal writing. That's how he wrote. And he knew that he wasn't going to be able to convince anybody of an argument if he was the one that was the author. Ben Franklin decided he was too old to write it. He didn't like the idea that a committee would rip it apart. He figured if I wrote it, it was going to be perfect. A whole bunch of other guys wouldn't think it was perfect, and they would make me change it, and that was just too much of a headache. So they decided that Tom should write it. A, he's the youngest and can't say no. But B, he is actually the best writer of the group. And Robert Livingston is there because he's not in favor of it. So he's meant to kind of put the brakes on it going too radical. And I'm not sure why Roger Sherman is on the committee. I need to learn more about Roger Sherman from Connecticut. But be that as it may, Thomas Jefferson spends 2 weeks and he drafts that document by himself.
At Monticello in Virginia?
No, they stay in Philadelphia.
Okay.
So they stay in Philadelphia to write it. And no one knew he was the only author of the initial draft until he made the claim in 1823.
Wow.
And John Adams supported that claim.
Okay.
So we know that that is true. That's not debated. What he then did was he sent it to Ben Franklin and John Adams to edit it. So those two men then made marks on it, and then Tom, I can call him Tom.
Sure,
Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
Tom, he then made his own notes, and then he claims to have printed a fair copy, in other words, a second draft. What I find interesting is the original still exists. It's in the Library of Congress. If you'd like to know what Ben Franklin's handwriting looks like, you can go see his notes on the original draft. The fair copy, which is the one that will then be debated by Congress, is lost.
Ah, interesting.
I think Nick Cage has it or something.
Buried underneath Liberty Church, downtown New York.
Yeah, it's somewhere. We don't know where it is, but you can ask him. But that is the copy. The second draft is debated by Congress. They change very few things. At the same time, they approve the resolution that Richard Henry Lee had put forward.
Interesting.
All of the delegates come back, and 12 out of the 13 have been given guidance to approve the resolution for independence, and that occurs on the 2nd of July. Anybody want to guess which colony abstained? It was us. That's New York. New York abstained. Now, don't worry, they'll come around here in just a minute. So 12 out of 13 vote for the resolution, and that's when they begin the debate. So they debate the declaration after they've already decided that they will declare independence. The declaration itself is the argument to everyone else for why it is that they must declare independence. So they want to get the language right. And they debate it for a day and a half. And then on the 4th of July, they approve the final draft. They then have it signed just by the President of Congress, John Hancock. He's the only one who actually signs it on the 4th of July. It is witnessed by the Secretary, Charles Thompson. And then the Committee of Five is directed to take that copy to the congressional printer, John Dunlap, who then overnight prints 200 copies in what's known as a broadside, so on big poster.
Wow. And so at this point, does Great Britain know this is happening, or are they is this again just contextual? Are they expecting this to come, or is it a surprise to them?
They will find out very quickly.
Right. Takes a while. Yeah.
No, it literally, they will find out very quickly.
Yeah. So
the document is then printed and it's sent all over the American states now. They're no longer colonies. As of the 4th of July, they are now states, i.e., territories, distinct territories with a distinct people who have their own right to control themselves politically. That's what that meant as of 1648 with the Treaty of Westphalia, which we won't get into. So they go, those broadsides go all over the place, but one of the places that copies go is New York City. And on July 9th, those copies are read to the American Army, to the Continental Army, which then promptly riots that night, tears down King George III statue, beheads the horse. I don't know what they have against the horse. Beheads the horse, and then melts the statue into a bunch of lead musket balls so they can shoot them back at the British. But it also goes to Staten Island. Okay. And on Staten Island is the British commander, William Howe. William Howe had landed on Staten Island just days before, and he is sitting at the Rose and Crown Tavern on Staten Island, and he gets a copy, and it is read to him.
Oh, wow.
So the first Briton to know about the Declaration of Independence is probably the commander of all British forces in North America at the time on July 9th.
Wow. And does he, I would assume he takes it very seriously, but then also you're already seeing all these other resolutions and petitions happening. So does he think, what is his thought?
Well, he probably was unaware of the impact of Thomas Paine's book or of the rest of the movements, because during all of that time, he was either in Boston or he was getting run out of Boston and was in Nova Scotia. Yeah. So he had not been in the North American colonies for much of that time, so he's probably unaware. He may not have been surprised, but part of his job had been to meet with George Washington and try to talk him out of this war. Yeah. Though he admits at the time when he meets with Washington's delegates, Washington doesn't meet with him, he meets with Washington's delegates from Congress and delegates from Congress, that he doesn't actually have power to agree to anything. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a waste of time.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, Melaine from Destination Duchess was just telling me that there are currently on view at FDR Library some of the original copies of Common Sense of Thomas Paine's 2 copies.
Fantastic.
So encourage you to go up into Hyde Park. So thinking about that language, let's talk a little bit about how special the language is of the Declaration of Independence. Tell us about that.
All right. So the Declaration of Independence is an argument. It's basically a political argument, and it's broken into 5 parts. So you have an intro, and the intro says, this is what we're going to argue. I like using this with my students. So I'm like, write like this. It's great. It's structured so well for an argument. So the intro says, this is what we're going to argue, that we have to declare independence. The second paragraph is the preamble. The preamble sets forth the principles upon which they have to declare independence. And that's the famous second paragraph. That's the paragraph that we all remember, and we can talk a little bit about why later. The next 2 sections, some people call it 1 section, I think of it as 2 sections, is the body of the argument. The evidence, there were 27 grievances that were listed. There had been more. They struck some of them. There were 27 grievances. And then there was a second part to the argument that said, and we tried to tell them that we needed help fixing them, but they ignored us. So 2 parts to the body. And then there is a conclusion which has the famous line, these united colonies are and of right ought to be independent states. That's the conclusion. So it's an argument, and it's written as a legal argument, which Thomas Jefferson would know how to do.
And is this taking on the format that these previous sort of is this format like completely different, or is it sort of the same?
No, this format is actually pretty traditional.
Yeah.
It's formatted as a petition, as a legal petition.
Yeah. So let's talk about that second paragraph.
Okay.
So beautiful. Mayor Kiriako did a beautiful reading here yesterday to celebrate July 4th, and we were discussing the fact that he was having trouble getting through it emotionally, and even when I read it, when we've been sort of preparing for this, it is just really, really incredibly powerful and such a beautiful idea. So
That's why I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to talk.
I wanted
about
Sean to
it.
read it.
I don't want to
but
get
we're
choked
like, no.
up in front of everybody.
No.
I'm just going to talk about each of the principles briefly. So the first one is the most famous. All men are created equal. Now, there's been an argument over whether or not Thomas Jefferson only meant men or only meant white men. He did not. He's talking about natural rights, not civil rights. By men, he was using the 18th century term for humans. So he does mean it in a universal sense. All men are created equal. That they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. So again, they have rights. 3, among those, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. It had been property. It was changed. Because in a strictly Lockean sense, it is life, liberty, and property because property guarantees liberty. That's a discussion for another day, but pursuit of happiness. 1, 2, 3, 4, that in order to protect those rights, men create governments and they are governed by their own consent. So they consent to be governed in order to get back from the government the protection of their inalienable rights. And then the 5th one, if the government fails to do that, we can overthrow it. That's what those 5 principles are in essence.
And people were responsive to them. They felt very positive about them. And the fact that it only took a day and a half to debate and agree to, I think just is a statement in and of itself. Like in this day and age, you think about that would be virtually unheard of. Something so powerful, right?
It would be.
They were fully on. They got it.
Well, it's interesting because Thomas Jefferson says that we believe these truths to be self-evident. If you know, we don't talk like that anymore, but what does he mean? He means they're obvious. Right? We all know this. We all agree that these principles are true. He may have been a little optimistic on that, but at least at higher levels with people that had an education in enlightenment thought, that is true.
And were they putting it together meaning for it to be somewhat of an organic concept? Or, you know, what I think is interesting that we don't often hear about are that it is this legal sort of argument, and that there are the arguments within this document that we don't often really think about as far as what the Declaration of Independence is. But were they did they envision that it would sort of be an organic document that would morph over time and to accommodate the growth of the country, or what was their perspective?
I think, I don't want to put words into their mouths, but as I've studied it, I would say that they had 2 intentions for the document. One intention was to inspire those Americans who are already fighting the revolution and encourage those who had not yet joined to do so. In that way, I would say yes. However, you have 27 very specific grievances that are going to mean nothing in about 2 years. And they have to know that as well. That part is focused on convincing foreign powers that the argument that they're making for independence is a legitimate argument so that they can gain allies to fight the war. So there are 2 audiences here, and I believe they are attempting to convince both.
Yeah, which they do, I mean, quite beautifully if you think about it. It is both a rallying cry and, you know, this argument that's very, very well made. You know, thinking about how beautiful that language is, and you know, I love the story of the reading it to the troops down in New York City, and then they go and they tear down the monument. Like,
Washington was so disappointed.
Yeah, let's talk about sort of this impact. So this you know, this Declaration of Independence is made, and talk to me about like how quickly the impact is felt literally around the world, right?
It is, and banned in certain places of the world as well, as too radical of a document. At home, in what is now these United States, the impact is immediate. It is inspirational for some, for others it is seen as hypocritical. So you do have loyalists who will, and British writers who will write what are known as rebuttals to the Declaration that basically hinge on the idea that the people making claims to universal human rights are also the same people who are enslaving a whole nother people in order to make money. But for the most part, you will have people in every single state flocking to their assembly houses to listen to the Declaration being read from July 9th forward. And by the way, July 9th is when New York finally got its act together and voted yes for the resolution. So we had a unanimous vote by July 9th. And at that point, then Congress has the document rewritten and engrossed. To be engrossed is to have it written in real flowery, like letters and look real pretty on big parchment. It's ready by August 2nd, and that's when everybody signs it, is on August 2nd. But it's read to crowds all over the United States, all over those 13 states. Many of them riot themselves. They go throughout courthouses, they go throughout taverns, they go to other political buildings, because in all of those are pictures of King George III. And they're ripping down everything that is the coat of arms of the royal family, every depiction of George that is visible, they tear them all down. If there's a tavern that has king on it, they're going to tear that sign down. I mean, it really gets everybody all spun up. But it also encourages almost immediately for some radical changes to be made by the states as they begin to draft their own constitutions. So Vermont is literally the first state in a political sense to abolish slavery in history. Does so in 1777 through its constitution because of the Declaration. Pennsylvania passes legislative laws for gradual emancipation. Many of the northern states follow that, but then in the same year, Massachusetts, or maybe this is 1783, Massachusetts wrote its constitution based on the Declaration of Independence, and therefore, in a first act of judicial review, the Supreme Court of Massachusetts ruled that slavery was inconsistent with the Constitution and abolished it. So all of these things are happening here. In England, in Great Britain, it's published in papers, in newspapers, probably by August, and by mid-September, it's being read in Poland, in Warsaw. The first German copy to be made, first German translation, is on July 9th, which makes sense because there's a large German population in Pennsylvania, so they first translated into German by July 9th, and then they're translating into languages all over the place. The Spanish Empire outlaws it. So you're not allowed to read the Declaration of Independence in any of the colonies in the Spanish Empire, but that doesn't really work. And a good study about the Spanish Empire would show you why. They have a hard time controlling things despite the central authorities that they try to put in place. So they outlaw it. And interestingly enough to me, one of the last people in Europe to actually get a copy of the Declaration of Independence is the one American diplomat in Europe, Silas Deane. So Silas Deane is hanging out in Paris, and he's reading newspapers. That's how he finds out about the Declaration of Independence, because the copy that had been sent to him had gotten lost at sea. He didn't know that. So then he writes back to Congress, and he's all hurt, because he's like, don't you trust me? Why aren't you telling me what's going on? And he has to wait until November to present the document to the King of France at Versailles, who was one of the main people they were writing for, because they needed France's Navy in order to compete with the British Navy. But he doesn't actually get it presented to him until November.
And once the King of France reads it, is he on board?
Well, I think his foreign minister is on board. But you gotta figure, if you're the King of France, can you be on board with the Declaration of Independence?
Right.
It's kind of difficult. France is still trying to hold on to this divine right thing. Like, the king, I'm gonna have to go back. I mean, it's Louis XIII. I don't know if that's his great-great-grandfather. I can't remember. I'm not as good with my French history. And he's the one who famously says, I am the state. Right? The Sun King. And then, is it Louis XIV? Thank you very much. Louis XIV who says I am the state. So they're still trying to hold on to this idea of a divine right to rule. I don't know that he's all that impressed with the argument, but he does like the idea that they have declared themselves independent, and Talleyrand, who is his foreign minister, is going to use that as a reason that France can legitimately support the revolution.
So, in my own Hobbesian sort of way, I think that there's got to be some sort of really strong economic drivers behind this, right? Which everything always comes back to the economy. So, that's sort of my perception. But is that true in this space? Like, is there a lot of inspiration, or are there economic drivers that are inspiring the Declaration of Independence, or is it really genuinely just this beautiful idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness?
Okay, so if we were talking about the U.S. Constitution, then I would entertain a Beardian idea about an economic reason for the Constitution to be ratified. I would still argue against it, but I would concede that it has its strengths. For the Declaration of Independence, I don't see it. Most American colonists are doing very well economically because they belong to the British Empire. The Navigation Acts, which they like to argue against, the American colonists, had protected their trade, had encouraged their shipbuilding industries, had created a huge carrying trade for them all throughout the Atlantic that was protected by the British Navy, the largest navy in the world. They made a lot of money being British citizens, or British subjects, really. And they had been spoiled by a lack of taxation and a lack of enforcement of many of those regulations. And they were arguing against the enforcement of those regulations. So there is an economic component to the initial resistance. It is initially a fight over taxation and economic regulation.
Right.
But that doesn't necessitate a Declaration of Independence, right? Initially, they're fighting to change the rules within the system, not declare themselves independent of the system. And if you look at the impacts of the war on the American economy, if they were thinking this was going to lead to some sort of economic bonanza, they really got that one wrong.
Yeah. I mean, that is interesting, the fact that they are actually taking some pretty severe risk to their own sort of economic structure by, disenfranchising themselves from Great Britain specifically.
Absolutely. Right? Well, Consider, if you will, if you own a rice plantation in South Carolina, if you join the American Revolution, you are cutting yourself off from all of your economic support because all of your product goes to the British West Indies. And you are now not going to have access to that market.
Yeah.
If you are a shipmaster from New England, from Boston, or from Marblehead, or from Salem, you join the American Revolution and you are cutting yourself off from the protection of the British Navy, and in fact, now you are going to become a victim of the British Navy.
Yeah.
There is no real economic incentive that I can see to this.
Yeah.
After the turmoils that are going to occur from 1783 to 1786, there's a good, strong economic argument for why the Constitution is necessary. But I don't see it for the Declaration of Independence.
Well, and I just want to talk about that a little bit more because I always like to boil it down to individual experiences and, think about these moments of conviction where people were making decisions to literally cut off their economic stability. I mean, that's fascinating to think about that. What is, it's a simple question, but what is really inspiring them to how do they feel confident about the fact, I'm going to make this decision, I'm going to join the revolution, I believe in this, and yet I am a shipbuilder who is thriving off of the British, and, how is that? Talk to me about that risk of an individual that's taking that.
So first, I'm not sure how confident they were that they were going to succeed.
Really?
One of the things that we always could become victim to is hindsight. We know how it's going to play out, and therefore we read into their actions some sort of knowing that wasn't there. They don't know how this is going to turn out. Ben Franklin, was it 1776 that makes this statement famous? I'm not sure. Where Ben Franklin says, we must surely hang together, or no, we must hang together or we will surely all hang alone.
Possibly. I never got cast in this show, so I never had to learn the script.
They don't know how this is going to turn out. They don't know if they're going to succeed. I do think that they believe that if they do succeed, their economic and political success will follow. They do have confidence in themselves on that point. And they believe that they can make up for the losses that they will incur by trading with France, trading with Spain. They can't foresee what's going to happen in 1783, 84, 85, which is that they're going to gain all this territory that's known as the Northwest and Southwest Territories, but then not gain access to the Mississippi, so it's not going to do them any good. They don't know that yet.
Yeah.
So I believe that they have faith that if they can succeed, there will be partners in the world that they will be able to trade with and move forward from there.
Yeah, on their own. That's interesting. And, we were talking, I was curious, there's the big famous picture of George Washington, and they're all sitting at a table and they're signing, I think it's on the back of the $2 bill, but that's the Constitution.
That's the Constitution.
That's not the Declaration.
No.
And so it occurred to me, it's like, we're not talking about George Washington. Like, where is he during all of this?
I know, we always talk about George Washington. We're not doing that
Exactly.
tonight. He's in New York.
Yeah.
He's got his
because
head
the British
in his...
have invaded New York, right?
That's right.
They have New York City, essentially, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And I like to think of George Washington as both fired up and energetic, and then at times with his head in his hands, kind of like this, because of all of the problems that he's having to deal with. The largest armada in the world up to that point, and will not be surpassed until D-Day, has just landed in New York Harbor. It's just arrived. I guess ships don't land, do they? It's just arrived in New York Harbor.
And when is this exactly?
This is July 2nd?
So July 2nd.
Yes.
And then on July 4th, they're in Philadelphia.
So all of this is happening all at the same time.
It's crazy.
It's all happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And Washington has just executed the first soldier to be executed in the Continental Army for a plot that was attempting to kidnap him and potentially assassinate him. One of his own personal bodyguards is the one that is hanged for that crime. That implicates both the governor of New York and the mayor of New York City. So all of this is happening all at the same time. So Washington has his hands full.
Yeah. And is there connectivity between Washington and the delegates who are in Philadelphia?
Absolutely.
They know, they're talking to each other.
They talk to each other all the time.
Yeah.
Washington, if you go into Washington's papers, they are all published on, well, they're not all, they're working on it. The project is attempting to publish all of them online, but many of them have been published for the Revolutionary time period. If you read Washington's correspondence, he writes to John Hancock constantly. It is a back and forth. It is not daily, but it's at least weekly.
Yeah. I mean, that is just really mind-boggling to think about all of that that's going on all at once. This armada is showing up on July 2nd. They're signing on the 4th. It's being read on the 5th in New York City. The armies who are fighting these people, I mean, it's just like, that is crazy. And there's no cell phones. There's no social media. I mean, that is, and I think about these individual folks, heading to Philadelphia, coming back together after being in their states and their colonies, and like riding on horses and walking on dirt roads, and just this intense like stamina and like grit that it took to make that happen cannot be underestimated. I mean, that's just incredible. I'm so blown away by that.
I would agree with that 100%.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I want to have an opportunity to hear from the crowd and get some questions. Are there any sort of questions that we want to ask? Linda.
That's a great question. It depends. So just to be able to ask the question so everybody can hear it, Linda was asking on a granular level concerning these petitions for independence that were going on. If Linda was a farmer working in a state or in a colony at that point in time, would she have had the right to vote? Would she have a say in those petitions, or would they just be something that the politicians were talking to one another, and the next thing I know about it, I'm reading about the Declaration of Independence on July 9th. It depends on where you lived. But if you're a farmer and you own your own property, for the most part, you had the right to vote in any of the 13 colonies at that point in time. Some colonies had abolished the property requirements or had lowered the property requirements for you to be able to vote. Some required 50, some required 5 acres, some required none. They changed the rules every once in a while. For the most part, the belief in the 18th century was that you needed to own property to have a stake in the government, and therefore property ownership was a part of that. But if you owned your farm, and particularly if you were in New England, you were voting in your town meeting, you were voting for the General Assembly. So yes, you would have had it. You would have had a say as much as any other person would have had a say through their vote, depending on the degree to which those petitions were voted upon.
And how was that happening? Were they gathering in a certain, like were they all coming together and having conversation and then voting, or was it, what was the polling situation like?
Again, it depended colony to colony. If you're in the South, it's all about counties. You're more sparsely populated, there's large plantations. In South Carolina, you have an enslaved black majority, so you don't have a lot of voters. And they're all spread all around. So they might be gathering in Charleston to have conversations like this. Then you would have, Virginia would be kind of a little bit less like that, but they would have more towns. They weren't yet a black majority, but they were getting there by this time. Then in New England, you have towns. And every town's got a town meeting.
Yeah.
Every member of the town is voting in the town meeting. Most of those members are probably members of the church, that congregational church. So there's this connection between the church of the town and the town meeting. Who are the town selectmen versus who are the members of the church council, the elders. Then they would elect representatives to go to the general assembly, the general court, to represent them at that level. So it did vary, but for the most part across most of these colonies, more people had the right to vote, I should say more men, had the right to vote than anywhere else in the world, but it is not unlimited by any degree. And we would consider it very limited.
And can we we're interchanging the word state and colony quite a bit at this point in this conversation.
Yeah, because if we're talking about prior to the Declaration, I'm trying to remember to say colony.
Right.
And if I'm talking about after the Declaration, then I want to make sure I'm saying state.
It's the Declaration that defines states.
100%.
Okay.
It is in declaring independence that these united colonies become independent states.
Interesting. Okay.
So on the 4th of July, you flip. It's kind of like I have a conversation with my cadets sometimes because they like to mix up British and English all the time. And I'm like, do not call them British before 1704, please.
Interesting.
There's an act of union that makes that matter.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to talk about colonial history prior to that, then I want them to be English because they were English. So
I'll be sure, Professor Sculley, to not call the British before 1704.
I'm sorry.
Donna, you have a question.
Yeah, I can very briefly now, and then actually we'll do more on that later on. But specifically, when you're talking about the covenant chain, you're talking about the alliance between the British and the Iroquois Confederacy, and the 5 then become the 6 nations and the 7th nation with the Delaware. And what happens is that the Oneida and the Tuscarora actually split with the rest of the Confederacy and decide to join the Americans, and that actually breaks up the Confederacy. So it's a pretty complicated story. And Washington actually attempts to also convince the Seneca to join, but they refuse, and they stay with the Mohawk and the Cayuga and the Onondaga. So it becomes a civil war within the Iroquois Confederacy that would take a long time to have a conversation, but it's a good conversation to have. So absolutely, we can talk about it later. And there's even some argument that the Iroquois Confederacy and its own politics influenced both the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. And I would have to do a little bit more reading. Most historians dispute that, but there are some that have argued for it. And I'd have to do more reading on those that are for it to be able to speak to it properly.
And speaking of the influence of that language and sort of where it was getting influences and then how the Declaration language did influence it, you start to see that in other spaces around the world, right? Like the idea is influencing other, are they declarations, are they petitions, or what? Talk a little bit about that.
Throughout history afterwards, whether you're talking about Seneca Falls of 1848, right, the Declaration of Sentiments, that draws its language directly from the Declaration of Independence to make the argument for women's suffrage. Or you're talking about Ho Chi Minh preaching the Declaration of Independence back to the United States in an attempt to convince the United States to support its attempt to free itself from the French Empire after World War II. Many of the revolutions that occur in Latin America derive their ideological foundations directly from the Declaration of Independence. The Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858 over whether or not, Lincoln should become the senator of Illinois and what does he think about slavery. Douglas thinks he's going to trap Lincoln, and Lincoln starts talking about the Declaration of Independence, and it becomes a debate over whether or not all men are created equal. And then, of course, he comes back to it for the Gettysburg Address to make the war about emancipation and not union. It goes on and on. There are revolutions in Italy, Germany, Poland. I just don't want to say a country that's not true. There are many others, but I know those three for certain, that in 1848 are having revolutions attempting to overthrow their monarchies, and they're using the Declaration of Independence and its principles as the reason for that revolution.
And if I ask you what your recollection is of the most recent time it's really been sort of a big part of some sort of movement, what would that be?
I think we're still talking about it, aren't we?
Sure.
I mean, we're still talking about who gets to be included. I mean, it's the revolution hasn't ended, in my opinion. It's still going on. We're still having these debates. What I would say is perhaps, immediately what comes to mind is Dr. King's speech at the Million Man's March, right? He directly alludes to the Declaration of Independence for the Civil Rights Movement, connects it right there. But I mean, it's continuing to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yes, sir.
It's a great question. So he's asking whether or not the size of the armada that lands in New York City in July of '76 speaks to a decision that's already been made by the British Empire that they are at war with their colonies. That's a difficult question to answer because the king doesn't make it official until August. Wait a second. No, he does. I'm sorry, I'm getting my years mixed up. Yes, because in August of 1775, the king refuses to take the Olive Branch petition and accept it, and he declares the colonies in open revolt. So that part's already been decided. However, Parliament is still willing to talk, or at least they say they are, and they tell William Howe that he's allowed to have a conversation with the delegates of Congress to try to figure out something before more blood is shed. But they don't give him any powers to accept any of the negotiation items that the delegates might provide. I believe that they made that armada that big because A, they thought they could cow the Americans into submission by a show of might. And B, they needed to end it right away. They had only just run the French out of North America 13 years earlier in 1763. They don't need the French getting into this. They don't need the Spanish getting into this. They need this to stay an internal affair, and they need to end it quickly. And I think they bring such a large armada in order to try to just stop it.
And to the gentleman's question, how long did that take to come over from?
Well, they were probably gathering many of those ships even prior to William Howe leaving Boston. It would take a very long time for them to gather that many vessels.
Yeah.
And then all of the soldiers. I think they had somewhere around 35,000 or 40,000 soldiers.
Yeah.
So that takes a long time to get all of that together, and not all of those people are located in Nova Scotia or in Canada. They've got to bring them from Ireland. They've got to bring them from the establishment at home. So,
but the actual trip itself, like when they set off,
that would be weeks.
Weeks.
It would be weeks.
And was there any calculation of the day that they showed up, or was that just as quickly as they could make it happen collectively?
That was probably as quickly as they could make it happen, but they certainly gathered at some other point to get everybody together to then come in.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we are talking about sailing vessels, so they're not all just going to move to a point at a set speed.
Yeah. And how many vessels and people is it again?
400 ships.
400 ships just showing up in New York Harbor.
In New York Harbor.
Unbelievable.
And then big ships.
Yeah, and as a tease for upcoming episodes, I mean, we'll talk more about, and we have sort of previously talked about here, all the importance of what happens around the Revolutionary War, literally right where we're sitting, and the fact that the British Armada is sailing up the Hudson River, which is another fascinating thing to think about. I want to just sort of finish up, and I want to go back to the 5 principles.
Okay.
These ideas of, remind me, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, all men are created equal.
So all men are created equal. They all have certain rights. Chief among those rights are the top three: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That they institute governments through their consent to protect those rights, and that if the government fails to do its job, they have the right to overthrow it and make a new one.
Yeah, and so, we hear a lot about sort of this imperfect document working towards a more perfect union. That kind of language exists in our culture. Of those, if you had to pick 5 out of the 5, which one do you think is the singular most important?
I think, without a doubt, the one that we have focused on the most, which is that all men are created equal. Everything follows from that.
Yeah.
Right? Because if we aren't, then our rights won't be equal. If our rights aren't equal, then what's being protected by the government won't be, right? It all kind of cascades from there.
Yeah.
So I would say that all men are created equal would be the most important. And I would say that those 5 tenets form our national founding philosophy. It's the vision of America, if you will. The Constitution is how we have decided to operate under that vision. It's founded upon that philosophy. In many ways, it's aspirational because we're human and we do things to other humans sometimes, and we see humans in ways that don't always comport with the idea that they're equal to us. So in some ways, it's aspirational to say that we see everybody as equal, and how are we going to act in that space? The Constitution is an attempt, it's an ongoing attempt, to operationalize that vision, to actually turn it into a political reality. And I think we're still striving to attain it.
I think so too. And I think what a beautiful thing that we can sit here 250 years later and continue these conversations and to think about how that language that these individuals worked so hard to put together so beautifully applies to our opportunities that we have available to us today in this day and age. And I just think that is an absolute gift. Yeah. So I want to end it there, but give us a little bit of a tease. Our next episode is going to be on November 7th, back over at the distillery, our next Cannons and Cocktails Live. We're kind of just getting started because the Revolutionary Wars just started to really move into this area after the Declaration, but give us a little bit of a tease about what's going to come up over the next few weeks and months before we hit November 7th.
All right, so November 7th, we are going to be talking about the Battle for New York. So we will really be talking mostly about the summer and the fall of 1776. We are going to begin with the amphibious landing on Long Island, which is the largest amphibious landing until D-Day. We are going to talk about the Battle of Brooklyn Heights. We will talk about Harlem Heights, White Plains. We will look at Fort Washington, and we'll watch Charles Lee get captured. Spoiler, sorry, he gets captured. We will talk about all of that, but we will end just shy of the Delaware River. Washington might make it across the river, but that'll be kind of where we're headed.
All right, we'll see. We'll see.
We'll see if he makes it.
So, I mean, this has been so incredibly wonderful, and again, just to be able to celebrate the Declaration of Independence on July 4th in this way. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
I want to also thank John Slackman, who's doing an incredible job doing our videography.
John, thank you, John.
I want to be absolutely sure and thank again the team and John McEnroe here at the Veterans Memorial Building for just welcoming us and being so special and wonderful.
Yep.
I have to thank Susan Johnson of Dennings Point Distillery. Our cocktails are empty.
Woo!
We're going to get more cocktails.
Thank you.
Nice. Thank you.
And,
thank you, Susan.
And he always tries to sign off before I can do this, but thank you, Scott, for leading this conversation. All right, it's amazing. And I want to say thank you to all of you for being interested enough to want to spend some time listening to us talk about this, asking questions. If you're still interested in having that conversation, please come up and ask any question you want. If I don't know the answer, I promise I will say I don't know. And if I'm wrong, I promise to correct myself.
He will
and be
find
okay
out.
with
I can
that.
tell you
will
that
be
for
fine.
sure.
Yes.
And
thank you
finally,
very
I just
much.
want to thank, like I said, this was the brainchild of a group of us sitting around in our Sunday afternoon Stoics conversation. And that conversation involves Bob and Lynn Costello, who are so incredibly supportive and amazing. We would not have this amazing mic system and just the incredible support of Bob and Lynn. Thank you so, so much. And we're going to continue on. Brian's back at the bar. We've got drinks flowing. This is a Cannons and Cocktails conversation. We're not going anywhere, but thank you so much and happy July 4th.
Yep, happy July 4th.